Welcome everybody to the Canadian Securities Exchange's Instagram live channel. Today we are talking to Steve White, who is the CEO of Harvest Health and Recreation, which is one of the larger US-based MSOs. And we're here for Cannabis Week talking to Steve. Steve, welcome. Thanks for your time, like I mentioned earlier. But, we had a chance to connect just over a year ago, February last year, Santa Monica, at one of the ArcView shows. I had a chance to go visit your facility in your dispensary, I should say, in Napa as well, and that was quite the experience. But might have times changed since then.
They certainly have. It would be interesting if we were doing this on a near the pier in Santa Monica again, but circumstances aren't like they were a year ago. For
completely,
sure.
But we've all definitely adapted well to it. So, last year when we seen you at that time, obviously you guys had quite a large footprint. You guys had licenses in 70 retail dispensaries. There was 15 cultivation and processing facilities. I want to actually get into this right away. There's a lot of other things I wanted to ask you, but I don't want to miss out on this. You guys recently, end of April, had some very large news with High Times. You want to maybe share some of the details of that?
Yeah, so I'll take it a step back to give it a little context.
Sure.
But 2019 was all about expansion and growth, and so this year it's about focusing on a return to profitability. And part of that, in that process, we've identified a handful of core states that are going to really drive that for Harvest. What we found after we did the Have a Heart interurban capital transaction was that we had a lot of exposure to California retail, more than what we had planned as an organization. And as a result, the High Times opportunity came along and presented us with an opportunity to divest some of that exposure so that we could focus more on the other markets that we've identified, which are Arizona, Florida, Maryland, and Pennsylvania.
Got it. So the news that came out was great. What was the sentiment from shareholders and your network?
So a lot of it was kind of what just happened, because while we've been telling people that we're going to be more focused as an organization on core assets, it hasn't exactly been for the investing public. It hasn't actually been something that they've seen us do a lot of. So to see a transaction like this was surprising for a lot of people. Yeah. They had a lot of questions about High Times itself, to which I said to folks, High Times is an interesting organization. It's been around for an awfully long time. Yeah. And if you're looking for somebody who's going to do well in the California market, why not High Times?
Got it. So that's happened. It's gone through. Well, let's now. I kind of wanted to jump right into that, but how have you adapted to this sort of work from home period? I imagine it's still business as usual. Not imagine, it definitely is business as usual when it comes to the cannabis industry. But how have you and your teams across different states been able to adapt to something like that?
So it's been a lot of leveraging of technology. But, if you think about what the idea is, we've been deemed essential in every state where we operate, every jurisdiction. So that's been key. So our frontline employees have not had to adapt much at all, except for the processes that we employ within the actual stores, cultivation facilities, and manufacturing facilities. For those of us who are, have a role at headquarters, we've been doing a lot of working from home, a whole lot of Zoom meetings, getting up to speed on what Microsoft Teams is, and right. So you have so many different ways that we're working, and what we're seeing is that in some instances, our employees are actually more productive outside of the office. And so there are a number of lessons that we're going to take from this experience and employ them going forward for sure.
And so how do you maintain the corporate culture that you guys have built and keep up the morale within the different team members that are working from home during these times?
So we talk a lot, and really that's it. And while we're not physically together, we are quite connected. And so most of our employees are on the phone or on Zoom meetings well more than 8 hours a day. And
Got it.
so it's also that you have this shared sense of experience because your cohorts are going through exactly the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. For anybody that might be just quickly joining us, you want to maybe just give us another quick intro into Harvest and what you guys do? We've
Sure.
got several new people that have just joined us.
Okay. Yeah. So we are a multi-state operator in cannabis. We do retail, we do manufacturing, and we do cultivation in a number of states across the country. We have one of the larger license footprints of the multi-state operators. And we went public on the CSE in November of 2018.
Perfect. So again, if any of our audience members do have questions for Steve, the comments are turned off, but there is a question box that you'll see on the bottom of your screen. Feel free to type them in there, and towards the end of this, we'll try our best to get those questions out to Steve. So this pandemic happens. Has there been? I mean, like we mentioned, it's been business as usual. There's been staff working from home, but have there been any negative impacts to the business that you've noticed and have had to deal with?
Yes, of course. Anytime something that this disruptive occurs, there are going to be negative ramifications from that. And so for a month, 2 months, 3 months, we've had operational people focusing almost solely on how do we tweak our operations plans to the change and sometimes the ongoing changing environment, across everything we do. So if we have a plan that we're going to implement across retail stores, for example, that gets put aside. And then we have to make sure that our online platforms, our phone ordering systems, our ability to provide products to people without them coming in and having the normal experience, we got to make sure that all of those things work. So it's been disruptive. Yeah. But demand is still there for cannabis products.
I wanted to get into that point next, into how you guys are still keeping up with the consumers and your patients that do come into your dispensaries, just to be able to still maintain those relationships, because when it comes to these cannabis consumers and medicinal patients that come in, I imagine they build quite a rapport and a bond with their associate, bud tender, whoever it might be. So how have your teams been managing that into maintaining those relationships with your consumers?
Let me put you on pause for a moment. I just
had
my ear pods drop off because of an incoming call. So let me see if I can reset this.
No worries. Hey, this is the times we're all learning to deal with this stuff. It's alive. Anything is possible. I know I mentioned to you the other day, kids, dogs, pets, anything's possible on these lives. So again, while Steve's fixing his headset, we are here for the Volume 1 with Steve White, who is the CEO of Harvest Health and Recreation. And if there are any questions from our... Oh, perfect. So,
sorry.
No, all good. So the question was, basically, I'll summarize it into what have your associates at the different medicinal recreational dispensaries been doing to maintain the communication and relationships with the consumers during this time of deliveries being done virtually and people not being able to come into the actual locations and have that one-on-one?
So people do, I mean, some of that one-on-one occurs on the phone if people do need that sort of interaction. So we've been able to do it to a limited degree. There are people who do physically interact. Customers and patients do physically interact with people in the event that they're picking up product. And at that time, they're able to sometimes change their order if necessary, do things like that, and get a brief consultation, but acknowledging the social distancing requirements and all of that kind of stuff. So it's not as easy, but it still does happen. We, of course, are concerned about people who are new to the cannabis industry, consumers that are new. It's harder for them, for sure, to use dispensaries as a resource in times like these. So those are people who probably aren't getting the same experience that they otherwise would.
I have a quick question on that point. Have you guys explored any sort of AR, VR sort of techs when it comes to that user experience?
We
Skills.
haven't. No, we
You haven't?
haven't. And part of what, you have to remember, we've been doing this a long time.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I've found over time is that the use of in an industry so regulated as ours, the use of technology sometimes can be limited when it comes to that consumer transaction.
Interesting.
Because the regulations say exactly what has to happen and when it has to happen.
Yeah. Okay.
So there isn't as much flexibility on those transactions as you would find in a normal retail experience. Furthermore, when you go to try to employ those things and you try to do them consistent with your regulatory requirements, the cost of the transaction for us goes way up. And that's not a cost that we can pass along to the consumer. So
Absolutely.
the thing that we have to think about is how can we do those things? How can we provide the right sort of interaction with our customers and with our patients in a way that doesn't cost them more than is practical for them?
That's actually really good insight. I didn't kind of think about it with that point. So why don't you give the audience a little bit of what's next for Harvest in the coming months and a year?
Yeah, what's next for Harvest in the coming months and the coming years is going to be relatively boring. And I say that because the way that the market has evolved, we're going to be spending a lot of time focusing on our core operations. And so we'll be building out cultivation facilities, manufacturing facilities, and working to really fine tune our retail opportunities. And so it's really about going, doing the business of cannabis transactions. And that's not as exciting as earth-shattering transactions and things like that. But for us, it's about executing the core business of marijuana, and that's what the next months and the coming year or so are going to look like for us.
Sounds good. Now, obviously, you guys in the States, we're talking to you out of Tempe today. Is that correct?
I'm in Tempe, Arizona.
How's things out there?
It's warm. We jumped up over 100 degrees. We have an excessive heat warning. For some people, wherever they sit, that sounds probably great. But we expect it to hit 106, 108 today, something like that.
How's the balance been with being in Tempe? I imagine you have a family and kids. So how's that been, juggling that at home along with teams across all different states?
So I've been married to this business for so long that I have not found another spouse, and I don't have kids.
Oh, you don't?
So
Okay.
I don't, no. So for me, it's been relatively easy. When I practiced law a few decades ago, for a period of time, I did that out of my home. And so I understand how to do that, and to deal with some of the mental issues that come with not physically interacting with people on a daily basis. So for me, it's been okay. It's been for me more about taking care of a dog.
Yeah.
But that's about it.
What kind of dog do you have?
So have you ever heard of a Cane Corso? It's an Italian Mastiff.
I have. They're like these big sort of like a Cane Corso, right?
Yep. Actually pronounced Cane, but
Cane,
it's
okay.
yeah. But yeah, he's gonna be a year old in a week.
Nice.
So
he's been keeping you busy.
He's been trying to keep me busy. Yeah, he has. So they're working dogs, so they do that when they get bored.
Definitely. My colleague Philip Shum out of Toronto is big on different dogs, and he's definitely mentioned a few different ones before. So he's commented. Yeah. He's like, "That's a nice dog choice." Giving him a quick shout out.
Thank you.
Steve, obviously, multi-state operator. There's upcoming elections in the States. How crucial are they for something like Harvest?
One of the biggest things for the U.S. cannabis operators is federal laws. And so the elections every year, and it's not just the elections, the results of the elections themselves, as it is the conversations that are occurring.
Yeah.
So when you have candidates who are saying, look, we think cannabis should be legal, that's a great conversation to be having, that is being had on a national level. You know, there's, who knows? I mean, there was a certain expectation of what Congress was going to look like, and maybe what the occupant of the White House was going to look like. And then all of a sudden COVID happens. And so I haven't seen any polling recently, but for us, there is a point at which our business gets unshackled, right? And so we deal with all sorts of impediments because we're federally illegal. Once those things go away and we get to operate like any other business, the fastest growing industry in the United States will start acting like it.
Yeah.
And that's cannabis, right? And that's us. And so we're very much looking forward to big changes on the federal level. I've been wrong about every time I've predicted when those changes were going to occur. So I've almost had to stop doing that. But I've learned over time that politics isn't necessarily about doing the right thing when you realize it's the right thing. It's about the preservation or transfer of power. And that's oftentimes what drives political decisions. And it's disappointing and disheartening, but it makes it very hard to predict when certain things are going to happen. But we're hopeful that they will. I mean, they have to over time.
My next question, we've actually been asking everybody during Cannabis Week Volume 1, is banking or legalization?
Which would we prefer?
Yeah.
Legalization in the right form, easy. Legalization solves the banking problem.
Okay.
It's one of the many problems that comes with being federally illegal. If that were to change, then we have, a whole different scenario. Safe banking for us is it's a big issue. And it's something that would be extremely helpful for every U.S. cannabis operator to avail themselves of traditional banking services. And so it's one of many important things, but if you get federal legalization, then you don't have to worry about banking because that comes with it.
Are you able to elaborate? I'm just looking at the time here. Are you able to maybe just give us a little bit of a background on that and what some of the hurdles are that your industry faces when it comes to the
banking itself? Yeah. There are plenty. I mean, we struggled as an organization to find deposit relationships. So, we were at one point when we started, we literally had big safes around town. And we consulted with security companies about how we could, drive cash back and forth to places. And not the situation that anybody would want to find themselves in, particularly when you're a regulated company. You couldn't do things at that time, like pay your taxes because they're not set up to take cash, right? So it was just crazy. Now we're at a point where we at least have deposit relationships in every state where we're operational. But what we don't have is we can't walk into a bank and get a loan. So instead, when we're looking to finance growth as an organization, we're looking at alternative sources. Those alternative sources are way more expensive than the traditional financing opportunities that you would see. So it's also true that while we have deposit relationships with everywhere, we don't have a single bank that covers 2 states. So imagine your accounting department, they're pulling their hair out when they've got, no matter what state you're in, it's a different bank with a different set of rules because they each have their, background compliance things happening in the background.
Yeah. And
it just makes business a lot more complicated and a lot more expensive than it should be.
Well, Steve, I appreciate you sharing that insight with us because, it's definitely nice to have someone like yourself who's on the other side of things be able to talk to investors and give them that higher level perspective into what some of the hurdles are when it comes to banking. To our audience, we're here with Steve White, CEO of Harvest Health and Recreation. We thank you very much for joining the Canadian Securities Exchange and some of our top execs within the cannabis space. For Cannabis Week Volume 1, we've had such a lot of demand for these interviews. We are going to be continuing it into next week. So please tune in again. And if you do have interest and do find our content informative, please feel free to follow us on any of our social media channels. You can talk to any of our team members via LinkedIn, or feel free to watch all our videos, podcasts, and content on CSE TV, which is on YouTube. Steve, why don't you give our users some information on where they might be able to, for anybody that's not following Harvest, where can they find more details on what you guys are up to?
The easiest place, I guess, to start is I'm old, so I would point you to a website, harvesthoc.com. But then we also do have social media platforms across, Twitter, Instagram, everything else. But I think the main hub would probably be that harvesthoc.com. Best place to start.
Steve, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I know, like I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, when I last seen you in person was February 2019. Santa Monica, California. It was a different time, and a lot of things were different at that time. But why don't I let you maybe take it away with a final message to our audience and your audience members that are here to hear from you?
Sure. First, I'd like to thank you for having us, and more generally speaking, for the CSE actually having a platform for U.S. cannabis companies, because there is no other.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's great to have a place where legitimate businesses in the United States have the ability to list publicly and allow people to own shares in those companies. So thank you for that. And then otherwise, just hopefully everybody out there is, staying safe, everybody's healthy, and look forward from Harvest to see us executing on our general business plan, which we're going to repeat over and over and over again until everyone gets really bored about what we're going to do. It's all about execution going forward. Great. So thank you.
Perfect. Well, Steve, I know that you've got a busy afternoon, so I'm going to let you get back to that, but I do want to thank you as well as the entire Harvest team to help make this interview happen. We look forward to having you. Hopefully we can see you in person when this is all done with soon enough. But in the meantime, we're here for you virtually whenever you might need us. Feel free and give us a call anytime. But we look forward to watching you guys grow as a company and see what's in store for Harvest in the coming months and years.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Once again, to everybody watching, thanks for tuning into the Canadian Securities Exchange's Cannabis Week, Volume 1. Tune in next week for some more exciting interviews with some of our top cannabis centers of influence and CEOs. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Be happy, healthy, and safe.